Welcome to Investigation 5.1. In this investigation, we answered the question wood versus steel. We were literally looking at wood versus steel roller coasters. In this, we are looking at creating relationships in categorical data. So we're looking at how various things play out. And with this comes the concept of percents. So looking at that sort of thing. I'm going to change the size of my pen. So, our focus question, what does the two-way table show you about preferences among groups? So, let's now look at what a two-way table looks like. So, a two-way table has various categories, and if you look at it, we have categories going down, and we have categories going across. In this particular problem, we are actually looking at passengers on the Titanic. So of these passengers, we're able to see that there was men, women, and children on there, and we can also see how many were saved and how many were lost on their journey. So we need to use a survival rate data of men, women, and children on the Titanic. Which of these claims about survival rates on the Titanic are true? So I'm going to zoom out here a little bit so we can see the table and we can also see these various questions that are being asked. We need to think, were more men or women saved? More men than women were saved. That's what it says. We need to say this is true or false. When I first look at these numbers, we have 338 men and 316 women. So we technically could say true to this statement. But then the question is really, were there more men than women saved? Well, when we are looking at the numbers, yes, more men than women were saved. But we can also look at this in terms of percentage. So if we look at this 338 and the 1352, we get that the total number of men that were on the ship was like 1,690. So we're just adding those two numbers together. So plus. So if that's the case, we can look at 338 over 1690 and actually create a percentage. So I'm going to do that right now. 338 divided by 1690. Divided by. And we end up getting literally 20%. So now let's look at the women. If we were to do that same sort of thing, we need to look at women and actually add these two numbers up together. So we get a percentage. So we have 316 plus 109. Oh my goodness, 316. My iPhone's being weird. Okay, so I got it. Now 425. 316 plus 109 is 425. And we're going to actually put 316 over the top of that. Just looking at these two numbers, 338 in comparison to 1600, and then 316 in comparison to about 400, we know that 316 is a bigger number in comparison, like proportionality-wise. So we know that we're going to end up having more women saved, and in fact it is 74% more women were saved. So if you're just looking at the numbers of kids or of people saved, men definitely win. But if we're actually looking at the proportions of various people, we can say false. 74% of women were saved compared to the 20% of men. So looking at percents can kind of help us and put things into perspective. It also says women were more likely than children to be lost. So let's do the same sort of thing. If we look at women, and this time we're looking at their death rate, so we're looking at 109 in comparison to 425. Let's do a little bit of math work and then show that in comparison to children. So I did a little bit of math magic, and here's my work that I show for this. We have 109 for women compared to 425 total women who were on the boat. 26% of them died. Whereas for children, we have 53 over 109. And that's actually, that's not 21%. I should redo that. 53 divided by 109, we get 48. So this is actually 49%. So 49% of children. So our question is, women were more likely than children to be lost. We can say false. half the number of children, almost half the number of children were lost. And we can see that, we can see that with this 49%. Next question. Men were about 6 times as likely to be saved than children. If we look at the saved data, we can see that 56 times 6 would get us around 336. So looking at just the numbers, sure, yeah, we could say that. But really, we need to look at the proportions. We need to look at the percentage. 56 divided by 109 is probably 51%. Exactly 51%. And for men, we have 338 divided by 1600, and we know that for men, the data was 20%. So therefore, we can say this is false. Looking at percentages really can help us put things into perspective. So I want us to now look at another way that we can see the same sort of data. So another way to see whether men and women and children were lost at the same rate is to find the overall survival rate for the Titanic passengers. Using the overall rate to find expected survival counts for each passenger, or we need to use the overall survival rate to for survival counts for each passenger category. So overall, 32% of passengers were saved and 68% were lost. Use the total numbers of men, women, and children on board the Titanic and use the overall survival rate. So let's look at how many men were on the Titanic and how many women and how many children. So we're going to write this data down here. We have men, women, and children, and we're going to get these total numbers. If I remember right, children was 109 and women was 425. And men was 1690, I believe. Yep, 1690. 1690. So this is very similar to part B in 5.1. So if we were to take those numbers and we have men, women, and children, we are going to take 1690 for men and multiply it by 0.32 or 32%. And then we'd be able to say, oh, that's the number of male passengers that are saved. So 1690 times 0.32, we get 540.8. We can continue this for all the other people too. So we have 1690 times 0.68. And we get 1,149.2. Now I'm going to continue this process, but I'm going to make math magic happen, so stick with me just one moment. So now we have the table filled out. We have women, where apparently only 136 people could have been saved, and expected 289 lost their lives, and children were at 34.9 and 74.1. So now what I'd like us to do is analyze whether or not this makes sense. So we're going to come over here. We're going to compare the table of expected rates to that of the real values and decide which passenger categories had greater numbers of survivors than you would expect if all the categories had stayed in the same proportion. So essentially we're going to look at the actual versus the predicted, which we've done with our linear inequalities and that, or linear equations as well. So let's look at our various data sets. We have this data right here for men. 338 people were saved, and what we expected was 540 should be saved. So for men's data, we have a great difference there. So more died than were saved in comparison to the prediction. For women, a greater number of women survived, so more women survived, much higher number. And the last part, kids, when we look at that, we have 34.9 and 47 or 74, and we also see that more kids survived in comparison to the prediction. So we have more kids lived in comparison to the prediction. More women also lived, but more men died. And actually, if we remember the whole story with the Titanic and how that actually occurred, because there were not enough lifeboats, we found out that the ship's captain was saying very specifically that only women or children and women should be in the lifeboats. So therefore, a lot more women and children were saved in comparison to the men who actually sunk with the ship. So kind of cool. This is how we can look at categorical data. So really, we are really looking at percentages. So keep that in mind as you work through problems that relate to categorical data. Thank you so much. Talk to you later. Bye.